Now, for the purpose of, well, the record, state your name, please.
My name is Nathan H. Turner Jr., Birmingham, Alabama.
How long did you or have you lived in Titusville?
Well, I've lived in Titusville actually since I was like 4 years old. I was born in Escambia County, Atmore, and my mother and father were teachers. They had met at Alabama A&M, Amelia Turner and Nathan Sr., and they got married in 1947, and they moved up here to Titusville. My father was actually already a resident of North Titusville. He lived on 4th Avenue South, and my mother had relatives up here. But we've lived here since I was like 4 years old, 4 or 5 years old.
What do you remember about life when you were growing up in Titusville?
Well, I remember it was always pretty mellow. It was, my folks, we went to church a lot, and we weren't as hard up as some folks because they were teachers. We weren't wealthy, but it was just a nice, pleasant place. Nothing, not a lot of gangs around and violence around. It was just real pleasant. And now if you mean my early years or all the way up and through teenage years, well, even as a teenager, it was still quiet and mellow. Now by that time, I was born in 1952, so by 63, I knew that the civil rights movement was going on, and it was kind of a eerie feeling, it kind of gloominess. You knew something evil whatever was going on. I knew we were black folks, and I knew that they were trying to get integration, a desegregation cast away, and it was kind of a odd, almost gloomy feeling back then, when up through my teenage years. But it was not. I know that there were some bomb explosions in Titusville. For instance, like in 1963, September of 1963, the church bombing, which 4 black girls were killed, and which was infamous. But 2 weeks later, there was another bombing about a block from our house on Center Street South. A dynamite bomb was placed, and it exploded, and it was a double bomb. In other words, one bomb went off, and then the second bomb threw shrapnel, which was a bunch of nails and stuff. But thank God, nobody came running out to see what was going on. But it was like a couple of blocks away from the house, and I think some of my relatives, my mother and father, my brother said they could actually hear the bomb. I didn't hear it. But other than that, and I remember the church, Center Street School where I went, it caught on fire a couple of times. And one of my coworkers when I worked at the Birmingham News said that I was suspected was racially motivated. And I told him I had never thought about that. But that school caught on fire twice. And sometimes I wonder, if the Klan had done it, because Birmingham, as you know, was nicknamed Bombingham, with 40, 50, or 60 unsolved bombings from the 40s through the late 50s. So maybe that was some of the handiwork of a Klan or Klan sympathizers.
You mentioned having gone to Center Street School, and then high school, you went where?
Ullman High School.
Ullman High School.
Which is now is no longer in existence. Just as a building.
A building on the UAB campus.
Right. Mm-hmm.
As you grew up, what did young Nathan Turner Jr. want to be?
Well, by the time I was like in the 10th grade, I kind of had an idea. ninth grade. What happened was I really didn't have any solid thoughts. I kind of liked to write and little simple stuff as a kid, and little poems and stuff like that my parents would make a big deal over. And then by the time I got to like ninth or 10th grade, I won the essay contest at Ullman High School, and I got my picture on the cover of what we call the Wolf Call, which was Ullman's newspaper. And so my teacher, Mrs. Reva Coleman, who was also a relative, a native of Titusville, she said, "Isn't it wonderful we have a journalist in our midst?" And then I said, "Yes, ma'am, thank you." Then I had to go home and look up the word journalist because I didn't know what she meant. But after that, it kind of gelled in me that I wanted to write. So, and then I won a little contest when I was like 14 years old, sponsored by Operation New Birmingham, and it was entitled "Why I Think Birmingham is a Number Wonderful," and I won like $25, and then I went to a journalism workshop in 1967 at the University of Alabama. So at that time, my late teens, that's when I knew that I wanted to be a journalist. Before that, I didn't have any real idea about what I wanted to do.
Did you have any heroes growing up?
Well, it's something I hate to say. Maybe I don't want to be silly, but I didn't really have too many heroes. Maybe like Superman or something. And I admired my dad and mom. But when I got to be in my like 16 or 17, I started admiring Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. because I knew with his skill, rhetoric, and intelligence, he was helping lead the black community out of segregation that had been in place for 200 or 300 years, and it started here in Birmingham and radiated out to the rest of the country with the institution of the Civil Rights Bills, 1964 Civil Rights Bill, etc. So I guess if I could think of anybody, maybe Dr. King was a hero and my parents, but I can't think of anybody that comes to mind right now, anybody else. So.
You ultimately went to and enrolled at University of Alabama.
Right, yeah. I went to University of Alabama at age 16. I'd graduated early. I'd gotten a couple of skips, and I majored in journalism, and I became the first black person to get a journalism degree at the University of Alabama. I didn't know it at the time, but I was the first to get an undergraduate journalism degree. I think there was a man who got a journalism degree in grad school. But the University of Alabama, if you wanted to know if it was been a racial tension or anything like that, I'm not sure what the next question is going to be.
Well, since you've given me a question, I'll go with your question. What was there?
Well, now in 1969 when I started, there were it was like 300 black students out of like 15,000, and it was like 4%, 3 to 4%. And it was not too many racial incidents, but every now and then, sometimes some black student or a black visitor to campus had been stopped by the campus police outside of Patey Hall, and I'm not sure what he was doing, but a white student in the dorm room above me called out something like, "Go to bed, N-word." And other than that, and then one time I'm kind of doing a compositive stuff. Back in when they had the 1970 May protests at Tuscaloosa because of the United States incursion into Cambodia. I remember I was with some black bunch of fellows, and we were going through the lobby of Patey Hall, And I think I said, "Hey, that guy over there, he's in a group. He was in a group called the Society to Send N-Words into Outer Space." And I mentioned it, and I guess the guy felt intimidated, and he next thing I knew, the Tuscaloosa police had come onto campus looking for us, and we didn't know it until Mr. Tom Strong, the student housing director of male housing, he saw us down in the lobby or somewhere. He said, "Y'all need to go to your rooms." And we didn't know at the time that the police were on their way. So later I heard that the Tuscaloosa police came busting in and saying, "Where are the N-words? Where are the N-words?" And they were looking to, beat the hell out of us, I guess. But by that time we were in our rooms, and nothing became of it. But that was kind of a racially motivated thing. But other than that, now I think the people who started before me, I think they had more overt racial violence. Maybe some kind of more or less, I guess you could say, verbal harassment or something like that. But by the time I was there, I didn't really notice it. But it was so few of us, But I'm sure it was the atmosphere was there. You could kind of sense it, but it was nothing. Not many overt racially motivated things happened.
Question: George Wallace, Governor Wallace, stood in the door at the University of Alabama,
Right,
making his infamous statement about segregation.
Mm-hmm.
That was before you went there, right?
Right. I started in 1969, September. Governor Wallace stood in the door June 11th, 1963, like almost 6 years before I started.
So, with that stance having been taken by the leader of the state, did you have any reservations about continuing your education at the capstone?
Well, not really. I remember I sent out one application to college, and that was the University of Alabama, and I was accepted, and it was like the only journalism school in the state, really. So I knew that that's where I wanted to go, but the race, my parents never really just coaxed me, tried to prepare me about going to school with a lot of white folks and stuff. They never, there's something I guess they figured I'd just deal with on my own. And I knew that my pastor, Reverend Sargent, he had a church. Our church was on South Side. Actually, it was like across the street from Ullman High School. And his children went to Banks High School. And they would talk about how whites would drive through the neighborhood and sometimes throw bricks through their window, and how Reverend Sargent and his older son, they jumped on a motorcycle and chased him with a shotgun. But I never experienced that kind of thing. But I think you were talking about, did I have any reservations about Wallace? No, I just wasn't concerned. Now, at one point, this is kind of a footnote, 1970, I believe, Wallace came to speak on the campus at what we call Memorial Coliseum, I believe that's what they called it. And the black students, I went in, we always kind of traveled together, walked together, and as we came into the auditorium, the whites started applauding, I don't know if they were genuine about it, but they started applauding as we came in, and Wallace was on stage. And that was that day that Wallace actually got booed by a lot of kids. I mean, not the majority, but it was funny that I would see that it was interesting to be at that event. And another footnote about George Wallace, and this may not be that germane, but I know fellas used to tell me, some of the white guys would say, "But you know, George Wallace's son, George Jr., goes to school here." And I said, it didn't really trigger any interest. But I did remember at that, weeks later, I passed him, George Wallace Jr., walking across what we call the quad, a big rectangle in the center of campus. We just passed each other. And I just thought in my mind, it was ironic that his dad had stood in the schoolhouse door 6 years earlier, and Wallace, I'm in school with his son, and we were about the same age, and it was just kind of ironic, but that was just like a footnote. But I didn't really have any trepidation about going there.
When you completed your time at the University of Alabama, you went to work immediately at the Birmingham News?
Yeah. I went to work at the Birmingham News immediately as a writer, and I did that for 2 or 3 years as a general writer, and then I worked as a copy editor most of my years there, which was about 30-some years. At one point after we got laid off when the economy started going down, and I was laid off too. I thought about seniority would help me, but it didn't. But I did go back as a curator, and then I just went on and retired.
Looking back to the original time there at the News, you got there what year?
1973.
73. Okay, so 1973, you are beyond the 60s. You're now in the 70s. Some would call it a new age. How many people of color were in the newsroom at that time?
Well, I think that when I started in 1973, there were like a handful. I'm going to say like 3 had preceded me. A fellow named Wright, Ralph Wright, Mrs. Geraldine Moore, and who did a community column. And there was a lady named Ingrid Kindred. But it was just less than 6. So I guess I was among the first blacks that they hired there. And that I remember my pastor once said, he was kind of giving me a praise from the pulpit. He said, "Well, Nathan, he works at Birmingham News. I can remember a time when only black person working in Birmingham News was a janitor." And so basically it was just a handful of that when I started in 73.
Sure. And did you realize, perhaps before he spoke or perhaps fully grasp it when he said what he said, the significance of a black man being among those who were telling the story of this area and this state?
Well, I hadn't thought about it actually, but I knew that a lot of papers were trying to become more diverse, and my presence or the presence of other black journalists helped the paper. For instance, I would be, as a copy editor, I would kind of be sensitive to stuff that, and I might point it out to another editor, this may be offensive to black people or stuff like that. But I knew that the paper had a conservative bent. But, for me, it was like the only place to work, wasn't that many opportunities to work. Some people said, "Why are you working at a conservative paper?" And I told them the whole state is conservative. I don't know where is no, but I knew that I was trying to represent. I was there to kind of, in a way, to make sure that the minority community was not offended on the pages or something like that. And I know it once or twice I had gone in to see the editor and said something about, for instance, when they would use racial descriptions, and I thought that they were kind of lax with them, like, let's say this place was robbed by a black man, so and I went in and said, well, it looked like we would need to have more description, because that plays into this old stereotype that black folks just do crime. So, but not to belittle the paper. I enjoyed working there, but you know, you had to kind of be on guard for stuff to make sure that nothing got in the paper that would be offensive to the black community. I mean, that wasn't your official role, but you knew in the back of your head that that's what you needed to do.
You took that as your responsibility, not necessarily assigning that. Not, of course, years later when the consciousness of the newspaper leadership rose to that level, I'm confident it wasn't just you, but at that time as you came in, there were people who simply didn't know.
Right.
And that's not to excuse them, but they thought that something might be acceptable or funny.
Right.
And you knew better.
Yeah, I knew better, and I didn't really see any blatant stuff that got in. But you know, like you say, you need diversity in the newsroom, so it won't be like a same just monochromatic look to stuff. And you know, people need input. But so I knew it wasn't. Nobody told me officially I had to do that, but I knew that you know, unofficial I need to be on guard. And like a lot of stuff is through ignorance, you know, and they don't have a white person was not going to have the perspective most of the time that a black person would have, or the sensitivity. So you knew that that you wanted to be on guard for anything that you need to bring to the attention of the senior editors or something.
As you grew up in Titusville, yes, I'm coming back to Titusville. From what I've been told, Titusville was almost this utopian black town within the town, where black people lived, and there were shops and businesses and operations. Titusville was a place where there was a movie theater. I'm not sure if you remember that. Where there were two bowling alleys, where there was what people called a golf course. I think it was just a grassy hill over where Loveman Village used to be. As you grew up, did you deal with whites? Did you have any exposure to Caucasians?
Well, I wish I could say something dramatic, but I did not. No. I mean, not really. The only time I had any type of exposure, what I would call a racial sense, was when I was like in the 10th grade, and I was walking down 6th Avenue, which is a main thoroughfare, and I was walking from Ullman High School to home, and I wasn't paying attention. I was looking at a car, I think they called it a Buick Wildcat, and it had a revolving headlight. And so I was looking at the car, and all of a sudden, wham, a big eight-wheeler truck operated by Baggett Oil Company, as they were turning onto 6th Avenue from 8th Street, heading east, and the right rear wheel came up, ran over my left foot. And by the grace of God, I did not lose the foot. It hurt like the devil, and I remember the brother, one of my co-workers who in journalism, Harold Jackson's brother, helped Jeffrey Jackson helped get me out of the street, and they loosened my belt and they called the ambulance. And I'm making a long story shorter. They took me to the hospital, and we went to see an orthopedic surgeon in a couple of days from there. And the surgeon thought that he was going to be a foot he would have to amputate. And this surgeon, I don't know if I want to call his name, but he had a segregated waiting room. This is 1965. And I really wasn't, I don't know if my dad was kind of upset, and initially I did not know why he was what was going on. Then I realized that here in 1965, despite all the protests and demonstrations, this surgeon had a waiting room for blacks, and that made my dad mad and my mom mad, and that was the first time I'd ever even consciously knew about apartheid. So other than that, Titusville was an insulated community. It was, most of the families had well-known, well manicured lawns, and they were teachers and plumbers and preachers, so we were just cloistered away from any real racial stuff, except for the bombings, occasional bombings, like in 1963. And as a matter of fact, I think there were other bombings that I only learned about later in the area, at the end of Center Street South. But other than that, that was like the only thing racial I can really remember, was that segregated waiting room in 1965. Other than that, we didn't have too many interactions with white folks, except the what you used to call the policy man, insurance man. He was invariably a white man, and other than that, there was not many interactions. It was kind of a placid area, and we were kind of sheltered in a way.
As you look back on it, was being in the sheltered world of Titusville, was that good, or was there a sense of shock when you actually faced something closer to the real world?
Well, it's a kind of combination. It was good to be sheltered. They had, like, we didn't ride the bus. We were blessed to have a car, and I know that they were segregated by the time when I was younger, but we never had to ride them, thank God. But to face that humiliation. So in a way, it was good to be sheltered, and then, in a way, it was, sometimes you want to get a taste of the real world. I know a lot of kids my age and younger went out demonstrating and getting thrown into paddy wagons and being sequestered in Legion Field, Fair Park Arena, which was almost like a concentration camp when you think about it. And in a way, I kind of admire those folks. And I know a lot of them did it, and probably maybe their parents kind of turned the other way, or they may have done it at the parents, coaxing, or who knows. But sometimes I kind of envy them for being a part of history like that. But it was good to be sheltered, but kind of wish you wanted adventure and going out and fighting for civil rights in that way, So it was good to be kind of secluded a lot of time.
I think, not to answer for you by any means, I think that it was good for kids growing up in Titusville, black kids growing up in Titusville, to see a world of possibilities, where you could have black shop owners and you could have blacks doing any number of things, and so many things were available.
Right.
But again, it was as though, from conversations I'm having with you and with others, as though, okay, I'm tempted to use the term separate but equal. Okay, you can go to these bowling alleys that are in Titusville. You can go to this movie theater that's in Titusville. You can do this, this, and this in Titusville. Don't think about coming over here. Over here to South Side. Don't think about coming over here to Avondale. Oh no.
Yeah.
This is where you belong, and you stay where you belong.
Right. Well, that's a good point. Now we were just blessed in the area I lived in and where you live. They were kind of middle class folks, and we had enough that we weren't just suffering. But I mean, we knew that there was still impediment to black folks. But but the schools we knew they were separate, but we knew they weren't equal. And just even today, they're not equal. The inner city versus Hoover and Mountain Brook and Homewood, but the people who were blessed or had enough resources that was fine, but that separate but equal it was not, it rang hollow a lot of times. We were like the blessed, that we weren't just in poverty, the little middle class that we had in Birmingham, but we know overall, even today, like 25 to 30% of the black folks in Birmingham, I think, live below the poverty line. I may be overstating it, but it's, separate but equal would appeal to a lot of folks, but especially segregationists, but it didn't really ring true when you looked at it.
Which is why the courts ultimately overturned it, because you can say what you want. If it's separate, it is not going to be equal. That has been proven time and time again.
Yes, I agree.
Nathan, again, as my time is starting to run short, and I appreciate very much you submitting to this question. I thought it was a nice conversation.
Thank you.
Is there anything, as you think back on growing up in Titusville and the like, I'll ask you this. Mm-hmm. You grew up in Titusville. You now reside in Titusville. Right. Mm-hmm. Why'd you come back?
Well, actually, we saw people. My wife is a teacher, and I worked at the newspaper, so we had a decent income. But we would, even in the 70s, well, we got married in 88. And so we did know about other black couples who had moved out to places like Hoover or maybe Homewood. But some of them, even in the 80s and 90s, we heard stories about some of the neighbors not being friendly and stuff like that. And so, make a long story short, we came back to Titusville almost just like we came here to roost, and we were comfortable here. Like one time we had a small fire at the rear of our house, so the air conditioner was smoking, and then our neighbor called the fire department. And I hate to say it, but my wife and I wondered, would we get that type of attention if we'd gone to a white area? Maybe we would have, but it's just, I hate to play into separate stuff, but we enjoyed the place we were comfortable with, and my wife Michelle grew up in Titusville with her family, and it was just always comfortable for us. And they graduated from Tuskegee there for her folks and taught. So it's a pleasant area and very placid. And we would rather live here than in Titusville than just, than any place else.
Which is a regular endorsement. I think, simply put, for you and so many people, it's a known commodity. You know what you've gotten, and you want to hold on to that.
Yeah, I agree. It's a known commodity. You know your area, your turf, and it's comfortable. And you just want to hold on to it and make the best of it. It's a blessing to even not to be. We see people living on the street and stuff like that. Some of them have alcohol problems and stuff, and mental problems. But it's good to live in a decent neighborhood.